I stepped off the plane at Fort Hamilton with sand still in my boots and a duffel bag slung over my shoulder. 9 months deployed overseas, and all I could think about was getting back to my house, grilling a steak, and watching the sunset from the deck I built with my own hands. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I saw when I pulled into my neighborhood. My land was gone, not just my deck. My entire backyard. The fence line had been moved up by almost 40 feet, and in its place stood a half-finished community garden surrounded by plastic fencing and cheery little HOA signs. I stared at the patch of dirt like it had personally insulted me. That's when I heard her voice. "Oh, Henry. You're back," Amanda Langford, president of the East Ridge Heights HOA, mid-50s, bleach blonde bob, and a voice that could scrape rust off steel. She was already walking down the sidewalk in her pink cardigan like she owned the whole subdivision, which, as it turned out, she thought she did. "You've got some nerve, Amanda," I said, stepping out of my truck. "Want to tell me why my land is now a community garden?" She tilted her head like I was the one being unreasonable. "Well, technically, Henry, that parcel was always a gray zone. The HOA determined it was unclaimed, so we voted to repurpose it for the good of the community. You really weren't using it. I have a property deed that says otherwise." She gave a little wave of her hand. "Oh, I'm sure we'll sort it out. In the meantime, the garden's already been approved and the funds allocated. You know how it is, use it or lose it. That's not how property law works. Then maybe you shouldn't leave for so long next time," she said, and turned her back on me like she hadn't just dropped a live grenade. I drove straight to the county records office, still in my uniform. Took me all of 20 minutes to confirm what I already knew. My property line was exactly where I remembered it. But then the clerk leaned in and said, "That's strange. Looks like the HOA submitted a boundary correction while you were overseas. Claimed your lot was improperly surveyed, says it was approved by the board." "They had no authority to do that," I said, jaw tightening. "Not without your signature, no." I walked out with a copy of the fraudulent survey and all the paperwork they'd filed. Amanda had forged a signature that looked like a drunk toddler had scribbled my name with their left hand. And somehow, they'd used it to justify selling a portion of my land to the HOA for exactly $1. $1. They sold my land while I was serving my country. I wasn't even mad. Not yet. I was calculating. Because Amanda Langford had just made a very big mistake. Back at home, I installed cameras front and back, dug up every document I had from the original land purchase. I called my lawyer, an old buddy named Curtis, who owed me a favor, and we started assembling a case. Fraud, forgery, illegal property seizure, and that was just the start. But I didn't go public yet. No threats, no angry emails. I knew Amanda. She was the kind of person who got real comfortable when she thought she'd won, so I waited, and I watched, and I documented. Every dollar spent on that garden, every board meeting where they approved more nonsense. Every time Amanda strutted past my house like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. What she didn't know was that I had already filed suit in county court, not just to get my land back, but to seize the HOA's entire subdivision as fraudulently managed real estate, and the judge. Well, turns out he was a retired Marine. This was going to get fun. The early morning sun cut through the blinds like a blade. I was already dressed by the time it hit the floor. Curtis had called the night before quiet serious. We were on deck for a preliminary hearing to review the forged documents. He'd filed a motion to freeze the HOA's assets and halt any ongoing construction on the patch of dirt where my backyard used to be. The judge had approved a temporary injunction. Amanda didn't know it yet, but her little garden project was about to be dead in the water. I pulled into the courthouse parking lot alongside Curtis, who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He handed me a folder thick with exhibits. "Judge wants clean copies of everything," he said, tightening his tie. "We're not just going after the forged survey. I dug into the HOA's filings with the state. You're going to want to see Exhibit G." I flipped it open on the walk into the building. Exhibit G was a notarized affidavit allegedly signed by me transferring 20% of my lot to the HOA for community enhancements. This was filed 2 weeks after your deployment started, Curtis said. Notarized by someone named Deanna K. Rudd. Familiar, never heard of her. She's Amanda's niece, lives in Tampa, no notary license in this state. My jaw clenched. So we've got wire fraud, forgery, and filing false documents. And that's just before breakfast. We walked into the courtroom and there she was, sitting at the plaintiff's table with a smug little grin and a stack of color-coded folders. She hadn't brought a lawyer. Just her and her vice president Paul something. The one who always wore polos tucked into jeans like he was waiting to be promoted to middle management in life. Judge Rawls entered. A tall man with a stiff gait and eyes that scanned the room like he was still looking for landmines. He wasted no time. We're here today on Motion 742B Property Dispute and Allegations of Fraudulent Land Reassignment. Mr. Carter, you are the legal owner of Lot 43. Yes, Your Honor. And you allege the HOA, represented here by Miss Langford, submitted forged documents to reassign part of your land for community use without your consent, Curtis stood. Not just forged, Your Honor. We have evidence they fabricated a notary seal, submitted false affidavits, and sold the land to themselves for $1. Evidence is in exhibits A through G. Amanda didn't stand. She just waved a hand like she was bored. This is all a misunderstanding. Henry's always been a little territorial. We were trying to improve the neighborhood, enhance property values. That's the HOA's job. Judge Rawls raised an eyebrow. Your job is not to commit real estate fraud, Miss Langford. Paul leaned over to whisper something to her, but the judge cut him off. If you're not an attorney, Mr. Davis, keep your comments to yourself. Curtis dropped the hammer right after that. He submitted a motion to compel the HOA to open their book's financial records, meeting minutes, communications regarding the land transfer. The judge approved it on the spot and ordered a temporary suspension of all HOA decisions related to land development pending full review. Amanda's eyes finally widened. She turned to me like I just flipped the board game off the table. You planned this, she hissed. Careful, I said. You're still under oath. Outside the courthouse, Curtis looked up from his phone. Got something else, your neighbors. A few of them reached out after I filed the motion last week. Turns out this isn't the only time Amanda's pulled something like this. She's been quietly annexing slivers of land from people who travel a lot. Vacation homes, elderly residents, military. And get this, several of the community projects she's funded have been billed to a shell company. One owned by her cousin in Oregon. She's laundering HOA funds. Looks like it. I've already informed the state attorney's office. They're opening an investigation. That night, I walked the perimeter of what used to be my yard. The garden was empty. No tools, no activity. Just a few sad tomato cages and stringy weeds. I noticed something new, a fresh pile of mulch dumped along the edge. A white stake stuck out from the middle of it, bearing a laminated tag that read, Garden Expansion Phase Roman II Approved May 3. I took a photo, time-stamped, and filed it away. The court order had been issued on May 1st. That meant someone had ignored it, possibly Amanda herself. Curtis filed a contempt motion the following morning. The judge didn't even schedule a hearing. He issued a bench summons and ordered a site inspection. By noon, a county inspector was standing in the middle of my yard with a clipboard, glaring at the mulch like it had personally insulted him. This is blatant, he muttered. They're lucky they're not facing criminal penalties yet. They might be, I said. Depends what they dig up next. And dig they did. The state attorney's office found irregularities in 5 other land transfers. Each involved a similar pattern: fabricated surveys, missing signatures, and fake notarizations. All of them led back to Amanda and her inner circle. Then came the kicker. A whistleblower from the HOA board, Mary Ellen, the soft-spoken treasurer with a long memory and a love for paper trails, came forward with internal emails. Amanda had instructed board members to fast-track land reassignment projects without notifying property owners. She'd even offered small stipends from the beautification fund as hush money. It was enough to trigger a full audit. Curtis filed a motion to place the HOA into receivership. Judge Rawls granted it pending the outcome of the fraud investigation. A third-party administrator was appointed to manage the HOA's affairs. Amanda and her cronies were stripped of their authority overnight. I didn't see her again until the community meeting called by the new administrator. The rec center was packed. Neighbors I'd never spoken to before stood shoulder to shoulder. A few glared at Amanda. Others looked stunned. Mary Ellen sat on the front row, her binder in her lap like it was a shield. The administrator took the mic. "We've reviewed the documentation submitted by Mr. Carter and his counsel. The court has determined that the land transfer was fraudulent. Mr. Carter's property will be restored immediately." There was a quiet murmur of relief, but it didn't stop there. Additionally, the administrator continued, preliminary findings suggest a pattern of misconduct by the prior board. All projects initiated under their leadership are suspended pending review. This includes the community garden, the lighting upgrade fund, and the pool renovation approved last quarter. Amanda stood, face flushed. "This is absurd." "You can't just undo years of progress," a man in the back, old Frank, who'd lived here since the subdivision went up, called out. "Progress doesn't usually involve felony charges, Amanda." Laughter rippled through the room. Amanda stormed out, her heels clacking like hammers on concrete. Outside, Curtis leaned against my truck, arms crossed. "The DA's office is preparing charges: forgery, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. They might even pursue racketeering if they can confirm the shell companies were used to siphon money." "What happens to the HOA now?" I asked. "They'll hold a special election. New board, new bylaws. And thanks to the court order, you now have veto power over any land reassignment in the subdivision." I looked out over the houses, the trimmed lawns, the quiet streets that had felt like mine once and were finally beginning to feel like that again. Amanda had tried to steal my land while I was away serving my country. Now, she was facing criminal charges, her empire dismantled, her name reduced to a cautionary tale whispered between porch swings. And me, I had my land back. But more importantly, I had made sure no one else would ever lose theirs again. The morning after Amanda stormed out of the community meeting, a white unmarked SUV idled in front of her house. Two men in dark windbreakers waited on the porch, one with a folder tucked under his arm. The moment she opened the door, they stepped forward and started talking. She didn't invite them in. She didn't have to. Within 5 minutes, she was in the back of the SUV, clutching a handbag and talking fast. Curtis called an hour later. "They executed a sealed warrant," he said, voice grim. "Search and seizure. Electronic records, financials, HOA files. They're building a case for grand larceny now, not just fraud." I didn't respond right away. My eyes were on the garden again. A crew had come by earlier and dismantled the fencing. What was left of the project now sat in a pile by the curb, broken trellises, warped planters, and bags of unused soil. The sign with Amanda's name on it lay face down in the grass. "They found something else," Curtis added. "One of the companies the HOA funneled payments to. Not only was it fake, it was used for a separate scam in another county 2 years ago. Same signature, same fake notary. Amanda might have been doing this long before you came home." That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was what came next. "They're opening a federal investigation," he said. "Bank fraud crosses state lines, and the moment they found fake tax IDs on the shell companies, it became a case for the feds." I hung up and walked the length of my property. 2 markers had been placed in the ground, orange PVC stakes, labeled by the county to re-establish the original boundary. I trailed my fingers along the line, then stopped at a spot near the back fence where the grass looked different. A rectangle of disturbed earth, just barely noticeable. I grabbed a shovel from the shed. The first thing I hit was a wooden box. Inside, HOA meeting notes, not digital handwritten. And not the kind they ever filed publicly. These were personal. Amanda's private notebook. Every adjustment made to property lines, names of residents, how much they'd paid or been paid to stay quiet. There were notes about me too. Military gone for at least a year prime target. Beside it, land value underestimated, push development proposal if he contests. I brought it straight to Curtis. She kept a ledger, I said, placing it on his desk. He flipped through it with a kind of reverent horror. These aren't just notes. These are admissions. This alone could bury her. She wrote it all down, like she thought no one would ever challenge her, or like she thought she'd never lose control. Within days, subpoenas went out to every current and former board member, some lawyered up, others cracked. Paul Davis, the vice president, agreed to a deal. In exchange for immunity, he provided the passwords to Amanda's private email server. It was hosted off-site, routed through a server in Nevada. That's where it got darker. Amanda had been selling access to homeowner contact lists. Entire profiles, names, birthdays, phone numbers, even garage key codes from the HOA's Security Upgrade Initiative. Sold to marketing firms, and in at least one case, a third-party contractor flagged for data theft. It wasn't just property crimes anymore. It was identity fraud, privacy violations, federal data trafficking. The sheriff's department dispatched a second team to her house. This time, they took her desktop, 3 tablets, and a safe from the master bedroom. The neighbor across the street said they found burner phones and preloaded debit cards inside. By the end of the week, a federal prosecutor had filed charges. 23 counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, money laundering, unauthorized sale of private data, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. But the fallout didn't stop with Amanda. The entire HOA board was implicated. Turns out, the treasurer Mary Ellen had come forward not just because of the land fraud, but because Amanda had threatened her. 2 months before I came home, Amanda had cornered her in the clubhouse and told her to keep the books tight, or your husband's business permit might get revoked. Mary Ellen's husband was a contractor. His license had been mysteriously delayed 3 times that year. She'd finally had enough. The court-appointed administrator called a second meeting. This one wasn't in the rec center. It was held at the town civic hall, with plainclothes officers stationed at the exits and a stenographer recording every word. Curtis stood at the front of the room beside the administrator. He addressed the crowd with the calm precision of a man who knew exactly how deep the roots of this scandal went. "The East Ridge Heights HOA is being dissolved," he said. "Effective immediately, all authority reverts to the town council until a new governing body can be established, free of influence from the previous administration. Any funds collected under false pretenses will be subject to restitution." Someone in the back, a woman I recognized from 3 houses down, asked what that meant for the upcoming assessments. "There won't be any," the administrator said. "All pending fees are suspended. And if you've paid into any of Amanda Langford's special initiatives in the past 2 years, you'll be refunded." A wave of stunned silence swept the room. Then the questions came. About the cameras Amanda had installed on street poles without permits. About the fines for lawn violations that never existed in the bylaws. About the letters threatening liens over unpaid dues that had somehow doubled overnight. Curtis fielded them all. Calm, direct. Every question tied back to the same answer. Amanda had twisted the HOA into a private fiefdom, and now it was over. After the meeting, I stepped outside and found myself face to face with Paul Davis. "I didn't know how deep it went at first," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You knew enough to fake signatures." She told us it was just paperwork cleanup, that the county wouldn't care, said if we didn't sign, she'd ruin our credit, said she'd done it before. She did, on my land. He nodded once and walked away. That night, I walked the full length of the street. Neighbors I barely knew waved from porches. Some came up to shake my hand. Others just said thank you. For the first time since I'd returned, the air felt different, like the neighborhood was breathing again. 2 weeks later, the federal indictment was unsealed. Amanda's trial date was set. Her bail was denied after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. They'd found a passport in a drawer under a false name and travel tickets to the Cayman Islands, dated 3 days after the garden project began. The town council launched a task force to help neighborhoods transition out of abusive HOAs. I was asked to sit on it. At first, I declined. I'd had enough of meetings and bylaws, but then I thought about all the other people who'd lost something and hadn't had the time or the tools to fight back. So I said yes. We rewrote the Subdivision's charter from the ground up. No board without direct elections. No fines without court approval. No one allowed to hold more than one term without a community vote. Every financial report posted publicly. And every resident granted the right to override decisions by petition. Curtis helped draft the new framework. Mary Ellen handled the books. And I just made sure no one ever tried anything like this again. Amanda's house went up for auction. The proceeds helped repay the stolen HOA funds. The garden was torn out, my backyard restored, fence and all, but I left one thing there, a plaque, not visible from the street, just a small metal plate in the ground. It read, "This land was stolen. It was taken back. It doesn't matter if you're gone for a week or a year. Your home is your home." And no HOA president, no crooked board, no self-appointed emperor of the cul-de-sac has the right to take it from you. Not while I'm around. The early summer heat had settled in by the time the subpoenas reached the last of the implicated board members. I was working on reinstalling the cedar planter boxes that had once lined the back of my fence when I saw the unmarked Crown Victoria glide slowly past my house. It didn't stop, just a slow, deliberate pass. But I recognized the passenger in the front seat, Detective Lewis Kramer. He'd interviewed me 2 weeks earlier about Amanda's offshore financial accounts. Curtis had told me not to expect updates from the feds unless they needed something, so the drive-by meant something had shifted. I dropped the hammer drill, brushed the sawdust off my jeans, and waited on the porch. Sure enough, my phone rang 15 minutes later. "The Cayman account's live," Curtis said. They traced 2 wire transfers totaling over $300,000. Both routed from HOA escrow accounts through a holding company out of Delaware. She was siphoning dues, fines, and the contractor deposits from the renovation projects that never even started. The pool fund alone accounted for $90,000. Is that enough for the racketeering charge? It was. They filed the enhancement this morning. Amanda's looking at a minimum of 20 years if convicted on the full count. I leaned back against the porch column. A faint breeze carried the scent of fresh cut grass and charcoal from a neighbor's grill. "She's not going to take a plea, is she?" she tried. The prosecutor laughed. "There's no deal on the table. Good." After the call, I walked the neighborhood. Not out of habit anymore, but because people had started to ask me to. They wanted updates. They wanted reassurance. But more than anything, they wanted to know if it was really over. I stopped by the house on Sycamore Lane with the half-painted shutters. An elderly man named Gene lived there, alone since his wife passed last winter. He'd been one of Amanda's earliest targets, fined repeatedly for incomplete home presentation. I found him scraping old paint off the second shutter, a fresh bucket of eggshell blue at his feet. "Looks good," I said. "Feels better doing it on my own schedule," he said. "Never thought I'd see the day." He didn't ask about Amanda. He didn't need to. The relief was written in the way he moved steady, unhurried, free down the street. I stopped at a house where a young couple had just moved in. They had a toddler running through the sprinkler and a golden retriever barking at the hose. The mother waved with a grin, then called out, "We just got the welcome packet. It's 2 pages. 2. No bylaws about grass height?" I asked. "Nope. Just trash pickup times and emergency contacts. Progress." The next few weeks were quiet for the most part. The new community council met biweekly in the old rec center, which had been renamed the community hall. Attendance was voluntary, and decisions were made by open vote. No more closed-door sessions, no more arbitrary fines, just neighbors figuring things out together. Curtis stopped by one afternoon carrying a manila envelope and 2 cups of coffee. "They unsealed the full indictment," he said, handing me the packet. 52 pages, not just Amanda. 3 board members are going to trial with her, and the IRS is opening a separate investigation into unreported income. Let me guess those shell companies didn't file tax returns. Not one, and the kicker, one of the companies listed a P.O. box in a trailer park that burned down 3 years ago. She didn't even try to make it look real. I flipped through the indictment. It read like a blueprint for greed: every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated record, every stolen dollar accounted for. But what caught my eye wasn't the financials. It was a line buried in the middle of the document: Victim Impact Statement. Henry Carter, Lot 43. Curtis caught me staring. The prosecutor wants you to read it at sentencing. The court needs to establish the personal cost. I stared at the page for a long moment. I'll do it. The sentencing was scheduled for a Friday morning in federal court downtown. The courtroom was cold, the lights clinical. Amanda wore a gray pantsuit with no jewelry. Her hair had lost its artificial sheen, and her hands trembled slightly as she sat beside her attorney. She didn't look at me once. The judge called the session to order. The prosecutor recited the charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, embezzlement, tax evasion, racketeering. The courtroom was silent, except for the shuffle of papers and the occasional clack of a stenographer's keys. Curtis gave me a nod. I stepped forward. I came home from deployment expecting to find my house intact. Instead, I found a garden where my backyard used to be. I found that someone had sold my land without my knowledge, forged my name, and buried the evidence under bureaucratic jargon. But this isn't about land. It's about trust. Amanda Langford didn't just steal money, she stole peace of mind. She turned neighbors into suspects and a community into a compliance zone. She used fear as a management tool and silence as a shield, and she did it all with a smile and a clipboard. I fought for this country. I've seen what happens when power goes unchecked, when systems break down. I never thought I'd come back and see a small version of that in my own neighborhood. But we took it back. Not with threats or violence, but with patience, law, and truth, and we'll keep it that way. The judge thanked me. Amanda's attorney requested leniency based on age and lack of prior convictions. The judge wasn't interested. Your client orchestrated a systematic abuse of power over several years. She targeted the vulnerable, manipulated public trust, and undermined the very concept of community. This court sentences Amanda Langford to 24 years in federal prison, to be served without possibility of parole. She flinched, but said nothing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Curtis handled them. I didn't give interviews, I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Back in the neighborhood, things settled fast. The properties that had been misappropriated were legally restored. The HOA was dissolved, permanently replaced by a voluntary neighborhood association with no enforcement power. Dues became donations. Meetings became potlucks. I spent the rest of the summer rebuilding, not just the fence line or the planter boxes, but trust. People who used to avoid eye contact now stopped to talk. Kids played in front yards again. One night, a neighbor left a thank you note in my mailbox, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photo of the old garden being bulldozed with one line written under it, never again. By fall, the neighborhood had changed. Not drastically, no big renovations, no sweeping reforms, just quieter, freer, real. I stood on my restored deck one evening, the air sharp with the scent of turning leaves. Curtis called to say the restitution payments had begun. Every homeowner who'd been fined illegally or had land taken was receiving a check. Small justice, but justice nonetheless. Amanda's house was sold at auction. The new owners were a young couple with a newborn. They added a porch swing, painted the door navy blue, and never once mentioned the previous occupant. Life went on. Not because we forgot what happened, but because we didn't let it define us. I served overseas to protect the idea of home. I never thought I'd have to fight for it here, but I did, and we won.